All right, welcome to the color management primer session. In this, we're going to talk about color management specific to Nuke and some of the knobs and some of the sort of high-level things. I'm not going to go into the actual knobs and buttons. That's going to be a different session. We're just going to talk high level about what it is and kind of things to be aware of at that level. So color management, what is it? It's the process of managing color spaces of the footage and devices and the renders inside of Nuke. There's two types. There is Nuke Default and OCIO. So Nuke Default color space, those are profiles that have been defined and then compiled by the Foundry and added into Nuke. They're baked into Nuke itself, but it's not all encompassing and it's not something that gets updated regularly. So generally speaking, you got to be leery of that. Is if you're working in a Nuke Default space and you're using modern wide gamuts, you might not actually have options to manage those appropriately. Also worth noting that the Nuke Default system is available as an OCIO config. That takes us to our, and here's a quick view of kind of your standard color spaces, transfer functions inside of Nuke. And if we actually look in a color space node, so we have our input, output, and then you have color space in, our illuminant, which is our white point, and our primary in. Primary in, I mean, that's our gamut. So here you can see we have quite a few options for gamuts, but you know, in this case, we don't have all of them. Like we don't have Sony Venice, we don't have sgamut 3, and a few others that are pretty regularly used. But you can use this color space tool sometimes to help you along if you need a little bit of a gamut transform when you have no other options. On to OCIO. So OCIO stands for Open Color I/O. It's an open framework for defining and implementing color profiles. There are different versions of OCIO. Those are implemented inside Nuke. And there are then config files. Nuke brings a couple to the table. So I'm in Nuke 15.1 right now. And if I use color management set to OCIO, Nuke provides a few different config options in the default. You can also download your own. You can roll your own. You can mix and match and combine things as long as they match the OCIO version for the Nuke that you're running. It's just a different way to implement color, and it allows us to use a config file. That's the important thing, is now we, the users, we can update our color on a different schedule than Nuke's point updates. And a lot of times, you know, we'll be locked into a Nuke version as the production version at a shop, and you don't want to mess with that. You can't. So updating Nuke to change color or add color features isn't a great system. And that's where OCIO really is nice, because if you get a show shot on a brand new camera, you can either compile a new config or download the latest config and now have access to that camera's color profiles via that OCIO config. So we have our different OCIO configs. You can then set other, we talked about working space before. So this is where you would set your working space. You can set that. It's typically set to ACES CG. That's usually a pretty safe working space. It's bigger than sRGB, but it's smaller than your camera native spaces. All right, now that we've talked about OCIO, that lets us talk about ACES. ACES uses OCIO to create a color management system. It's implemented by OCIO via config files. There are many different flavors for the various versions of OCIO, as well as flavors of ACES itself. ACES stands for the Academy Color Encoding System. It's basically a standard that the Film Academy adopted to help facilities have better color rendition from facility to facility and display to display. It sort of operates in two places, and you hear ACES used a lot when we talk about color management. I like to kind of separate it. There's ACES as a management system, and there's ACES as color spaces. And it's really important to kind of understand the difference. So when we talk about ACES as a management system, it's implemented by OCIO. It's a unified system, so we can reproduce color, here and there. It's maintained by the Academy. There's a couple keywords here. IDT is something you'll see in ODT. IDT is input device transform. That's the transform from whatever native color space to ACES 2065. And it's really, really important when you're talking about ACES and color management. Everything in ACES as a management system is going to or coming from ACES 2065. Any transfer function, any matrix, transfer functions are linear. They're going to linear, but from a gamut standpoint, those matrices are converting from that native space to 2065. ODT is another one. That's output device transform. It's actually talking about a physical device, because when we render things, usually we're using an IDT on our footage to bring it to our working space. And then we're actually using an inverse IDT for our renders. We're using an ODT to go from our working space to our device, i.e. our monitor or our monitor out. So that's our, transforms. We go from our 2065 to our display space. I think of it as more as like the output display transform, not the output device transform. Next up, let's talk about ACES as a color space. Because the thing is, you can use ACES management and never actually use ACES color spaces. You can set your working space to the camera native space or linear sRGB and never touch any of the ACES spaces. The first one we're going to talk about is AP0. AP0 is a gamut that is a very wide gamut that's really used for storage. ACES 2065 is a linear image with the AP0 gamut. Next up is AP1. We also think of this as ACES CG. So this is a linear space with a smaller gamut with visual effects in mind that allows our tools to just work a little bit better. So that's the AP1 gamut. Next up is ACES CC. So that's CC stands for color correction. This is a log working space. This is for working in tools that want logarithmic native footage. Like Nuke, for example, loves linear footage. That's what the tools are meant to work on. Some suites want logarithmic footage, as their tools are built around logarithmic imagery, versus Nuke, which is built around linear imagery. So we want our images in linear space. So ACES CC isn't something we see a lot of on the compositing side, unless maybe a pull house gave us plates in ACES CC, but that's not typically how that works. ACES CCT, it's the same as ACES CC, except it has a lifted toe. So basically at the bottom of the curve, they lift it up so that you get out of the negative values, because a lot of like color suites, for example, they don't like negative values. So CCT will lift those dark values up a little bit to make them a little friendlier in your color grading suites. So next up we have ADX10 and ADX16. ADX stands for the Academy Density Exchange, and those profiles are specific for film scanning, and those come with ACES gamuts. Historically film scans were scanned to Cineon, but Cineon is just a transfer function and does not have a gamut component. So ADX allows you to have a fully managed transfer function and gamut inside of ACES. Okay, so that pretty much covers ACES, but ACES isn't the only management system out there. There are other configs you can use. Like I mentioned earlier, Nuke default is an OCIO config. So you can access all of Nuke's settings as an actual OCIO config. So if you want to do some modifications, you can do modifications there. AGX is another one. You typically used on the CG side. It's just a different way to handle tone mapping that some people like. TCAM V2, which is a baselight system. SPI has their own. That's from Sony originally. You can also mix and match. You can create your own. You can pull pre-rolled configs and then modify them. You can add LUT files or formulas. They're kind of the world's your oyster if you want to get really nuts and like coding in YAML. But yeah, so there are other configs, and that's something we do regularly. If, say there's a new camera that comes out, or there's an old camera that was in a previous config and isn't in a new config, we will backport, or we're using an older config, but we need new cameras. We'll backport things this way, or we'll port something from an older config into a newer config. And, that's one of the nice things about OCIO in general, is the extensibility to write your own color management so that it's tailored exactly to your needs.